Dog won't stop barking at subway car. Police arrive and what they find inside stuns everyone. The screech of subway brakes pierced the morning air at 5 Point Station as Max's posture suddenly changed. Sarah Collins watched her canine partner's ears prick forward, his muscular body tensing beneath the tactical vest. 6 years of partnership had taught her to read every subtle shift in the Belgian Malinois' behavior, and this wasn't his usual alert. "What is it, boy?" Sarah kept her voice low, scanning the crowded platform. Rush hour in Atlanta's busiest transit hub meant hundreds of potential threats, but Max's focus locked onto something specific. The inbound train from the eastern suburbs had just pulled in, its doors sliding open to release a flood of commuters. Max lunged forward, straining against his lead, nose high in the air. Not the erratic excitement of a drug hit or the sharp alertness of explosives. This was different. Sarah had seen this intensity only twice before in their career together, and both times it had led them to something big. "Sir, please step back." Sarah raised her voice as a man in an expensive suit tried to push past them. The morning crowd parted around them like water around a rock, business people clutching coffee cups, students with oversized backpacks, all casting nervous glances at the police dog blocking their path. Max's bark echoed off the station's concrete walls, sharp and insistent. He pulled Sarah toward the third car, his nails clicking against the platform tiles. Through the windows, she could see passengers packed shoulder to shoulder, faces buried in phones, headphones firmly in place. "Atlanta PD, everyone needs to exit this car immediately." Sarah projected her voice over the station noise, flashing her badge. The initial grumbles of protest turned to concerned murmurs as Max's barking grew more intense. The evacuation took 7 minutes of protests and mounting tension as Max's behavior grew more agitated. Sarah's hand rested on her weapon, eyes scanning each departing passenger. Something was wrong in that car. She could feel it in her gut, the same way she'd felt it the night they'd uncovered the weapons cache in the abandoned warehouse last year. Only when the last passenger stepped onto the platform did Sarah give Max the command he was waiting for. "Search!" The dog moved with practiced precision, working his way methodically through the now empty car. Sarah followed, noting how Max's attention kept returning to a specific section of paneling near the floor. The maintenance access panel looked identical to dozens of others lining the subway car's interior. But when Sarah knelt to examine it, her flashlight beam caught something the casual observer would miss: fresh scratch marks around the edges. "Stand back, boy." Sarah pulled on latex gloves and worked her fingers along the panel's edge. A click, barely audible over the station's ambient noise, and the section swung open. The smell hit her first. Gun oil and cordite, sharp and chemical against the background of stale air and human sweat. Inside the compartment, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay the first piece of the puzzle, a tactical weapons magazine, military grade, definitely not something that should be hidden in a civilian subway car. But it was the documents beneath that made Sarah's blood run cold. Detailed maps of the city, security rotation schedules, and photographs of key infrastructure targets. Max's whine drew her attention to a second compartment, cleverly concealed behind the first. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is K97. We're going to need EOD and major crimes down here, and tell them to clear the station, now." The dog pressed against her leg, a warm, solid presence that steadied her nerves. Sarah ran her free hand over his head, feeling the slight tremor in his muscles that told her he was still on high alert. Around them, the station's evacuation alarm began to wail. Max's sudden growl snapped her attention back to the present. Footsteps approached from the far end of the car, too measured and deliberate to be a confused passenger. Sarah's hand moved to her weapon as she tucked the documents into her vest. A name had caught her eye in the papers: James Martinez, her former instructor at the academy. "Max, guard!" The command was barely a whisper, but the Belgian Malinois shifted instantly into a defensive position. Sarah drew her weapon and moved toward the car's center, using the poles for cover. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped. For 3 heartbeats, silence filled the car. Then Max's warning bark shattered the quiet, just as the first shots rang out. Sarah dove for cover as bullets punched through the car's interior. Through the chaos, she caught a glimpse of their attacker. Tactical gear, professional stance, definitely not some random criminal. Max stayed low, his training keeping him out of the line of fire while maintaining his protective stance. "Atlanta PD, drop your weapon!" Sarah's voice competed with the echo of gunfire and the still wailing evacuation alarm. The only response was another burst of shots, more precise this time, targeting her position. The staccato of gunfire suddenly ceased, replaced by the sound of running feet. The shooter was retreating, but Max's warning growl made her freeze. A second later, she heard it too, multiple footsteps approaching from both ends of the car. Sarah's hand found Max's fur, feeling his steady heartbeat against her palm. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. She quickly photographed the documents with her phone, sending the images to her secure department email before tucking them away again. Outside, the footsteps reached the car doors. Sarah took a deep breath, centered herself, and prepared for what was coming. They'd found something big. Now they just had to survive long enough to figure out what it was. The first bullet missed Sarah's head by inches, embedding itself in the subway car's metal frame with a sharp ping. Two more shots followed in quick succession as she rolled behind a row of seats, Max's low growl mixing with the sound of approaching footsteps from both ends of the car. "Max, stay!" The command came just in time to stop her partner from launching himself at the closest attacker. Sarah needed him close. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but Max was her ace in the hole. The Belgian Malinois pressed against her side, muscles coiled and ready. A voice cut through the chaos, sharp and authoritative. "Officer Collins, slide your weapon out and stand up slowly." The accent was slight but distinctive. Military training, possibly special forces. These weren't common criminals. Sarah's mind raced through their options. The platform outside was surely secured by now. Backup would be minutes away, but that might be minutes too late. Her free hand found the documents in her vest, the paper crackling softly. "Last warning, Collins." The footsteps grew closer, more confident. Sarah felt Max trembling with restraint beside her, waiting for her command. She took a deep breath, squeezed his shoulder once, and made her decision. "Max, smoke!" It was a code word they'd developed together, not part of standard K9 training. The dog exploded into action, launching himself over the seats with a ferocious barrage of barks, creating a wall of noise and movement. Sarah rolled in the opposite direction, coming up firing. Her first shot caught the lead attacker in the shoulder, spinning him into his partner. The surprise gave her the second she needed to sprint for the subway door, Max instantly falling in beside her. They burst onto the platform just as the emergency response team arrived, their shouts filling the station. "Officer down! Officer down!" Sarah's voice rang out as she and Max took cover behind a pillar. The backup team moved in with practiced efficiency, securing the car and the suspects. But when they reached the compartment where Sarah had found the documents, she knew what they'd find. Nothing. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in Captain Chen's office, Max alert at her feet despite the long morning. The captain studied the photos on her phone, his expression growing darker with each swipe. Military-grade weapons, classified security protocols, infrastructure targets. He looked up at Sarah. "And you're sure about Martinez?" Sarah nodded, keeping her voice steady. "His name was all over those documents, sir. And the attack method. It matches what he taught at the academy. Quick, coordinated, no hesitation. Martinez built half the tactical response protocols in this department," Chen said, rubbing his temples. "If he's involved, we need solid proof before moving. These photos aren't enough." Max's head suddenly snapped up, his attention fixed on the office window. Sarah was on her feet instantly, hand moving to her weapon. But it was just a maintenance worker, pushing a cart past the office. Still, something about the man's movement caught her eye. "Sir, I need access to the subway maintenance logs. All shifts, all lines, past 3 months." Chen raised an eyebrow. "You think they're using maintenance crews as cover?" "Max has been acting strange around service personnel all week. I thought he was just being protective, but now..." Sarah scratched behind Max's ears, remembering. 2 days ago, he wouldn't let a maintenance worker near our vehicle. The guy had proper ID, but Max wouldn't back down. Do it quietly, Chen warned. If Martinez is involved, we don't know how deep this goes. Trust no one outside this room. He paused, looking at Max. Except him, of course. The maintenance logs were a maze of schedules, routes, and worker IDs. Sarah spent hours cross-referencing them against the station cameras, looking for patterns. Max stayed by her side, occasionally accepting water bowls from junior officers who'd learned long ago to help the K9 unit however they could. Around midnight, a pattern emerged. 6 different maintenance crews had accessed the same series of tunnels over the past month. Each crew had proper credentials, but the personnel files showed inconsistencies, small ones, the kind most people would miss. Sarah was digging deeper when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Walk away, Sarah. Some things are bigger than right and wrong." Max growled at her sharp intake of breath, pressing closer to her leg. On her screen, the maintenance crew files began disappearing one by one, wiped clean by someone with high-level access. Sarah quickly took screenshots, sending them to her private email before they all vanished. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Max's ears prick forward. Sarah tensed, remembering Chen's warning about trusting no one. The steps grew closer, measured and deliberate, like the ones from the subway car. "Working late, rookie." The voice from the doorway made her blood run cold. James Martinez stood there, his familiar smile now carrying an edge she'd never noticed before. Max's growl deepened, his eyes locked on Martinez. Sarah felt her world tilting on its axis as her former mentor stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. The man who'd taught her everything about being a cop was now at the center of something dark and dangerous. "Sir," Sarah kept her voice neutral, one hand resting on Max's shoulder. "I didn't expect you back from retirement so soon." "Let's cut the act, Sarah." Martinez moved closer, his stance casual, but his eyes sharp. "You always were my best student. Too good, maybe. Seeing things you shouldn't." Through the window, she could see the night shift officers going about their routine, unaware of the tension building in the small room. Martinez laid a folder on her desk, his expression unreadable. "Think carefully about your next move," he said softly. "Some choices you can't take back." Sarah stared at the folder on her desk, her mind flashing back to another folder Martinez had handed her 3 years ago. That one had contained Max's file, a K9 officer deemed unstable after losing his handler in a warehouse raid gone wrong. She'd been newly transferred to the K9 unit, still raw from losing her own partner in a shootout, when Martinez had given her a chance to save them both. "Remember what I taught you about second chances, Sarah?" Martinez's voice pulled her back to the present. Max's growl deepened beside her, but she kept her hand steady on his shoulder. "I remember everything you taught me," Sarah replied, making no move toward the folder, "including trust your gut. And right now, my gut's telling me you're not here to help." Martinez's smile didn't reach his eyes. 3 years ago, you were a broken cop with a broken dog. I put you back together, made you what you are." He tapped the folder. "Time to return the favor." The memory of that first day with Max washed over her. The Belgian Malinois had been housed separately from the other K9s, his kennel card marked with warnings. But when Sarah had approached, she'd seen past the aggressive displays to something familiar, the same pain she carried. "He's dangerous," the kennel master had warned. "Lost it after watching his handler die. Can't be trusted." But Martinez had backed her decision. "Sometimes," he'd said, "the ones they call dangerous are just the ones who care too much." Now, watching her former mentor, Sarah wondered if he'd seen something of himself in them, broken pieces that could be reshaped to his purpose. "The weapons shipments," Martinez continued, "they're just the beginning. Change is coming to this city, Sarah. The kind of change that could clean up the streets for good. We're building something bigger than law enforcement, something that could finally make a difference." Max's muscles tensed under Sarah's hand. The dog's instincts had never been wrong. Not about people, not about threats. She thought about the night she'd first taken him home, both of them wary, both watching for signs of betrayal. They'd connected over shared trauma. Sarah would wake from nightmares of her partner bleeding out in her arms, and Max would be there, whining softly, understanding the weight of survivor's guilt. Slowly, they'd rebuilt each other's trust in the world. "You gave me a second chance," Sarah said carefully. "Taught me to trust my instincts. Now those same instincts are telling me you're involved in something that's going to hurt people." "Hurt people?" Martinez laughed sharply. "Look around, rookie. The system's already hurting people. We're just changing who holds the power." He leaned forward. "Your old partner, Richards, you think his death was random? The system failed him, failed you both." Sarah's hand tightened in Max's fur. The dog's growl became audible, a clear warning. "What are you saying about Richards?" "I'm saying there's more to his death than you know, more to everything that's happened in this department." Martinez's eyes hardened. "That night? The tip about the drug deal? It came from inside. Richards was getting too close to something he shouldn't have seen." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She remembered that night in vivid detail, the confidential informant's tip, the rushed operation, the backup that arrived too late. She'd replayed it countless times, but never questioned its origin. Max shifted his weight, positioning himself between Sarah and Martinez. The movement sparked another memory, Max doing the same thing the day they'd found the weapons cache last year, a case that had mysteriously been reassigned before they could trace the suppliers. "How many?" Sarah's voice was ice. "How many cases have you buried? How many cops have you sacrificed?" "Only the ones who forced our hand." Martinez stood, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. "I'm offering you a place on the right side of history, Sarah. You and Max, you're both assets we could use. Think about it, real justice, not just enforcing laws written by corrupt politicians." Sarah's free hand moved slowly toward her weapon, but Martinez noticed. "Careful, rookie. That folder contains enough evidence to end both your careers. K9 units have been suspended for less than an aggressive handler losing control of her dog." Max's ears flattened at the threat, but he held his position. Sarah felt the weight of the screenshots in her email, the evidence they'd gathered, but Martinez was right. He'd built the department's protocols. He knew every way to discredit an officer. 24 hours, Martinez said, moving toward the door. "Read the folder. Make the right choice." He paused, looking at Max. Shame to see another good K9 officer end up like his last handler. The threat hung in the air as Martinez left. Sarah waited until his footsteps faded before reaching for the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photos, her and Max at scenes they'd worked, notes on their cases, and a detailed report on the night Richards died. Max pressed against her leg, offering silent support as he had countless times before. Sarah scratched his ears, her mind racing. Martinez had given them 24 hours, but he'd also given them something else, confirmation that Richard's death wasn't random. "What do you think, partner?" she whispered to Max. "Ready to dig up some old graves?" Max's alert posture was answer enough. Together they'd built something stronger than their broken pieces, a partnership founded on trust and instinct. Now those same instincts were telling them it was time to finish what Richards had started. Sarah pocketed the folder and stood. They had 24 hours to uncover a conspiracy, years in the making. But first, they needed to visit an old friend, the retired detective who'd worked Richards's last case before being forced into early retirement. It was time to learn what her partner had really died for. Retired Detective Mike Callahan's house sat at the end of a quiet suburban street, its unkempt lawn and peeling paint a stark contrast to the well-maintained homes around it. Sarah parked her unmarked car a block away, Max's alert posture telling her they weren't alone. "Someone's watching the house," she murmured to her partner. Max's ears twitched in response, his nose working the air. 3 years ago, Callahan had been the lead detective on her partner's case. 2 weeks after Richard's death, he'd taken early retirement and disappeared from the force. Sarah unclipped Max's police vest, replacing it with a civilian harness. If Martinez had people watching Callahan, she needed to look like just another neighbor walking her dog. They circled the block twice before approaching the house from the back alley. Max froze suddenly, his attention fixed on a parked van with tinted windows. Sarah caught the slight movement inside, someone tracking them through the glass. She kept walking, maintaining the casual pace of a routine dog walk, but her heart was racing. The back door opened before they reached it. "Took you long enough," Callahan's gruff voice came from the darkness. "Get inside before they make you." Sarah and Max slipped through the door into a dimly lit kitchen. Callahan looked older than she remembered. Grey stubble, deep lines around his eyes, a slight tremor in his hands as he locked the door. "They've been watching for 3 days, he said, gesturing to several monitors set up on his kitchen counter. Security camera feeds showed multiple angles of the street. "Ever since Martinez started moving the big shipment." "You knew?" Sarah's hand found Max's fur, steadying herself. "All this time, you knew what really happened to Richards?" Callahan's laugh was bitter. "Why do you think I'm living like this?" He moved to a cabinet, pulled out a thick file. "Your partner found the connection. Martinez and these weapons, they're just the start. The whole department's compromised." The file contained photos, documents, handwritten notes, 3 years of evidence gathering. "Martinez isn't just running guns," Callahan explained. "He's building something bigger. Ex-military, corrupt cops, anyone willing to sell out?" Richards figured out they were using official protocols to move weapons through the city. Max's sudden growl cut through the conversation. Sarah moved to the window just in time to see the van's doors slide open. "They're not watching anymore," she warned. "They're moving." Callahan grabbed the file and a go bag from under the sink. "Basement, now." They barely made it down the stairs before the first shots shattered the kitchen windows. Max led the way through the darkness, following Callahan to a hidden door behind old shelving. "Maintenance tunnel," the retired detective explained as they entered a narrow concrete passage. Connected to the old civil defense system, Richards found their supply route by mapping these tunnels. The sound of footsteps above was followed by splintering wood. Sarah pulled her weapon, positioning herself behind Max. The dog's muscles were rigid, focused on the tunnel ahead. "There's an exit that leads to the storm drains," Callahan wheezed as they ran. "Half a mile north. It connects to..." The bullet caught him in the back, throwing him forward. Sarah spun, firing twice at the shadow in the tunnel entrance. Max lunged forward, but she called him back. They couldn't fight in these narrow confines. "Go!" Callahan gasped, shoving the file at her. "Everything Richards found. Proof of who's involved. Get it to Captain Chen. Only one left we can trust." More footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Sarah grabbed the file, but Callahan gripped her arm. "Sarah, Martinez didn't just kill Richards. He's been using the K9 program, training dogs for private forces. Max was supposed to go to them after his handler died. You ruined their plans when you rehabilitated him." Max whined softly, nudging Callahan's hand. The old detective managed a weak smile. "Good dog. You proved them wrong, both of you." "Mike, we can't leave you." "Already dead, kid." He pulled a detonator from his pocket. "These tunnels, rigged them months ago. Always knew they'd come. Now go. Make it count." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes as she nodded. "Ready, Max. Run." They sprinted down the tunnel, Max leading the way through the darkness. Behind them, Callahan's voice echoed one last time. "This one's for you, Richards." The explosion rocked the tunnel, debris and dust billowing past them. Sarah and Max kept running, the file clutched to her chest. Martinez's deadline was approaching fast, but now they had proof of his operation. Getting it to Chen wouldn't be simple, not when they didn't know who else was involved. As they emerged into the pre-dawn light, Sarah checked her phone. 15 hours until Martinez's deadline. The weight of the file in her hands felt heavier with each step. The truth about his operation, about Richards's death, about the corruption poisoning the department from within. Max nudged her hand, his eyes fixed on her face with unwavering trust. Sarah scratched his ears, remembering what Callahan had said. Martinez had plans for Max all along, plans they'd disrupted by healing each other's wounds. "Come on, partner," she whispered. Time to finish what Richard started. They moved quickly through the awakening city, staying off main streets. Sarah's mind was already working on their next move. Martinez had built his operation using the department's own protocols, which meant the evidence would be hidden in the last place anyone would think to look. The Police Academy archives. The Atlanta Police Academy stood dark and silent in the early morning hours. Sarah crouched behind a maintenance shed, studying the building's outline while Max kept watch. 3 patrol cars had passed in the last hour, too many for this time of day. They're expecting us, she whispered to Max. The Belgian Malinois' ears twitched in response, his attention fixed on a ground floor window. Sarah smiled grimly. Same room she was thinking of, the records office, where Martinez had drilled countless cadets on proper evidence protocols. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Smart girl coming here. Time to talk. A moment later, security lights around the building clicked off one by one. Sarah checked her weapon, then ran her hand along Max's back. Together, the dog pressed against her leg in response. They'd survived worse odds, but tonight felt different. Tonight would end, one way or another. They moved silently across the academy grounds, keeping to the shadows. The records office window was already open, the security system disabled. Sarah helped Max through first, then followed. Inside, the familiar smell of paper and old coffee filled the air. Welcome home, rookie. Martinez's voice came from the darkness. Lights flickered on, revealing him seated behind the records desk, Callahan's file open in front of him. 2 armed men flanked the door, weapons trained on Sarah and Max. Wondered how long it would take you to figure it out, Martinez continued, gesturing to the shelves of records around them. Everything hidden in plain sight. Every weapons transfer, every training exercise, all properly documented and filed away. Where no one would think to look, Sarah finished. Because you wrote the procedures. Martinez smiled, but his eyes were cold. I taught you well, but Callahan shouldn't have shown you this. He tapped the file. Some truths are better left buried, like your old partner. Max's growl was low and dangerous. One of the armed men shifted nervously, but Martinez remained calm. You know what Richards discovered? He stood slowly. That change requires force, real change, not this bureaucratic dance we do. We're building something important here, Sarah. A force strong enough to actually clean up this city. By arming private militias, training attack dogs. Sarah's hand rested on Max's shoulder, feeling his muscles coiled tight. That's not law enforcement, that's terrorism. That's power. Martinez moved around the desk. The same power that let us eliminate threats like Richards. The same power that could have made Max into something truly effective, instead of this domesticated pet. The insult made Max's hackles rise, but Sarah held him steady. You're wrong about him. About all of it. A good cop doesn't need a private army. Good cops end up like Richards. Like Callahan. Martinez's expression hardened. Last chance, Sarah. Join us or join them. Sarah felt something change in the room's atmosphere. Max sensed it too, pressing closer to her leg. Martinez wasn't negotiating anymore. He was stalling. The sound came too late, boots on the hallway floor behind them. Sarah spun as the door burst open, more armed men flooding in. She dove behind a filing cabinet as bullets sparked off metal shelves. Max lunged at the nearest attacker, his training and power sending the man crashing into his colleagues. Shoot the dog! Martinez's order cut through the chaos. Sarah emerged firing, taking down one gunman as Max disabled another, but they were surrounded, outgunned. A bullet grazed her arm, sending her stumbling. Max turned at her gasp of pain, giving one of the attackers an opening. The taser hit Max square in the side. The dog went down hard, his body convulsing. Sarah screamed his name, trying to reach him, but strong hands grabbed her from behind. Martinez approached slowly, looking down at Max's twitching form. Shame. He really was one of our best prospects. He raised his weapon, aiming at the helpless dog. Time to put him down properly. Wait! Sarah struggled against her captors. The evidence. I uploaded it all. Everything Callahan had, everything Richards found. It's already out there. Martinez paused. "You're bluffing. Check your phone. Check the news." Callahan had a dead man's switch. The moment he died, it all went public. Sarah kept her voice steady. "Kill us, and the whole city will know why." Martinez pulled out his phone, his expression darkening as he scrolled. Sarah felt the grip on her arms loosen slightly. She glanced at Max, saw his muscles tensing as the taser's effects wore off. Their eyes met briefly. They'd only get one chance at this. "Smoke!" Sarah's command rang out. Max exploded into action, years of training and trust culminating in one perfect moment. He launched himself at Martinez as Sarah drove her elbow into her captor's solar plexus. Gunfire erupted, but Max had already knocked Martinez's weapon away, his jaws clamped on the man's arm. Sarah grabbed the fallen gun, taking cover. "Atlanta PD, drop your weapons!" New voices joined the chaos, police radios, running feet. The backup she'd called before entering was finally here. Martinez's men looked to their leader for direction, but he was too busy trying to fend off 80 pounds of highly trained Belgian Malinois. "Stand down!" Sarah's voice cut through the confusion. "It's over, Martinez." The fight drained from Martinez's face as realization set in. She hadn't been bluffing about the evidence, just about when it would be released. His own obsession with documentation had given them everything they needed. "Max, hold!" Sarah approached carefully as her fellow officers secured the room. Martinez lay still, Max's teeth still firmly but carefully locked on his arm. The dog's eyes never left his target, even as Sarah knelt beside them. "You were wrong about him," she told her former mentor quietly. "He's not a weapon. He's a guardian. That's something you never understood." Dawn broke over Atlanta as Captain Chen stood in the evidence room, surrounded by the breadth of Martinez's operation. Weapons laid out in neat rows, documentation of shipments, training protocols for the private security forces, all of it meticulously catalogued by the man who'd nearly destroyed the department from within. Sarah sat in a chair nearby, wincing as a medic cleaned the graze on her arm. Max lay at her feet, still alert despite their exhausting night. Every few minutes, his ears would prick up at sounds from the hallway, where officers led another of Martinez's conspirators past in handcuffs. "Final count is 32 arrests," Chen reported, reviewing the preliminary findings. 3 city council members, 2 judges, and half a dozen high-ranking officers. Martinez's network ran deeper than anyone imagined. "He was building an empire," Sarah said, scratching Max's ears, "using the K9 program to train attack dogs, turning good cops into private soldiers. If Callahan hadn't kept digging after Richards died, if you hadn't trusted your partner's instincts," Chen corrected, nodding toward Max, "that subway inspection could have been just another routine call." Sarah remembered that moment. Max's insistence, her decision to trust him despite the protests and pressure. One choice that had unraveled years of corruption. The medic finished bandaging her arm and left. Chen waited until they were alone before speaking again. "There's something else you should see." He pulled a file from his briefcase, older than the others, its edges worn. "Found this in Martinez's personal safe. It's about your partner's death." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the file. Max pressed against her leg, a steady presence as she read. The operation report had been altered, key details changed or omitted, but Martinez had kept the original. "Richards wasn't killed in a random shootout," she said, her voice tight. "They targeted him specifically. The tip about the drug deal, the delayed backup, it was all planned. He'd connected the weapons disappearing from evidence to a series of K9 training accidents," Chen explained. "Dogs becoming too aggressive, handlers getting injured. He was close to exposing the whole program." Max whined softly, sensing Sarah's distress. She remembered those cases. Good dogs suddenly turning violent, experienced handlers making rookie mistakes. At the time, it had seemed like a string of unfortunate incidents. Martinez was conditioning them, she realized, using the training to identify which dogs could be turned into weapons. That's why he was so interested in Max after his handler died. "But you got to him first," Chen said. "Gave him something Martinez never understood, trust." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Martinez was being led past in handcuffs, his arm heavily bandaged where Max had taken him down. He locked eyes with Sarah through the glass, his expression a mixture of anger and something else. Respect, maybe, or regret. "I trusted you," she told him, as an officer paused with the prisoner. "We all did. You taught us about justice, about protecting people. Was any of it real?" Martinez glanced at Max, then back to Sarah. "I taught you to be effective, to do whatever it takes to complete the mission. You learned that lesson better than I expected." "No," Sarah corrected him. "You taught us to be weapons. But Max showed me there's a difference between being effective and being right. That's something you never understood." She turned away as they led him out, Max following her movement perfectly, anticipating, supporting, protecting. Everything a partner should be. "The press is waiting outside," Chen said after a moment. "This is going to be the biggest police corruption story in Atlanta's history. They'll want to talk to you both." Sarah looked down at Max, who met her gaze with steady confidence. "Let them wait. There's somewhere we need to go first." The morning sun cast long shadows across the police memorial wall. Sarah stood before the panel of names, Max sitting perfectly at attention beside her. Her fingers traced the letters of her first partner's name, Detective James Richards. "We did it, Jim," she said softly. "Finished what you started. Found the truth." Max's tail thumped once against the ground, his subtle way of showing support. Sarah smiled, remembering all the times Richards had talked about getting a K-9 partner, how he'd seen something special in the program that others missed. "You were right about everything," she continued. "The corruption, the training program, all of it. Martinez didn't understand what makes a real partnership work. It's not about control or power. It's about trust." She knelt beside Max, feeling the strength and loyalty in his solid frame. "Ready to get back to work, partner? The city still needs its guardians." Max's response was immediate, a soft whine and a gentle bump of his head against her shoulder. Sarah smiled, scratching his favorite spot behind the ears. Together, they walked away from the memorial wall into the bright morning light. Behind them, the press gathered, cameras flashing. But Sarah and Max moved with the easy confidence of partners who knew exactly who they were and what they stood for. Not weapons to be wielded, but guardians sworn to protect. Some bonds, forged in fire and tempered by trust, could never be broken. And some partnerships, born of shared pain and healing, became something more than their parts, became a reminder of what real justice looked like. Atlanta would recover from Martinez's betrayal. The department would rebuild, stronger and wiser for having faced its own darkness. And in the end, the truth that Richards died protecting had finally come to light. A police cruiser waited in the parking lot, K-9 unit emblazoned on its side. Sarah opened the back door and Max jumped in, ready for another day of protecting their city. There would be other cases, other challenges, but they would face them as they had faced everything else, together.